The conversation around the Detroit Lions heading into the 2026 NFL Draft is starting to feel less like speculation and more like a defining moment for the franchise's immediate future. This is a team that has spent the last several years building one of the most complete rosters in football, carefully constructed through the vision of general manager Brad Holmes and a front office that has prioritized development, continuity, and long-term sustainability. But now, for perhaps the first time in this rebuild, the Lions are facing real structural pressure, and it's coming from a place they once considered a strength, the offensive line. When you look at the departure of Taylor Decker, it's not just about losing a starting left tackle. It's about losing stability, leadership, and a foundational piece of an identity that has defined Detroit's offense. For years, the Lions have leaned on physicality up front, controlling games with protection and run blocking. Decker was a central part of that equation, and replacing that kind of presence is not something you casually address with mid-round picks or short-term stopgaps. It requires intent, investment, and above all, precision in roster construction. The addition of Larry Borom gives the Lions a body, a player with experience, and someone who can compete. But let's be honest about what Borom represents. He's been a swing tackle for most of his career, a player who provides flexibility rather than certainty. There's value in that, but there's also a clear ceiling. When you're trying to protect a high-functioning offense and maintain elite-level efficiency, good enough at left tackle is rarely actually good enough. And that's where the draft conversation becomes so critical. Sitting at pick 17, Detroit is staring at a board that could very realistically deliver high-end offensive tackle talent right into their lap. Prospects like Caden Proctor, Monroe Freeling, and Blake Miller all project to fall within that range. These are not developmental flyers. These are potential cornerstone players, guys who could step in and redefine the position for the next decade. So the question isn't just whether the Lions need a tackle. It's whether they can afford to pass on one. Because when you zoom out and look at Holmes' offseason messaging, there's a clear emphasis on maintaining and upgrading the offensive line. That's been a consistent theme. And yet, when you evaluate the actual moves, there's a disconnect. The interior may have improved with additions like Cade Mays, and there's more competition across the board, but at tackle, the room has undeniably taken a step back. That's not speculation. That's reality. This creates a fascinating tension between philosophy and necessity. Holmes has built his reputation on not drafting for need, on letting the board come to him. It's a strategy that has worked beautifully so far. But every philosophy gets tested eventually, and this feels like one of those moments. Because if Detroit passes on a tackle in the first round, they're not just sticking to their principles. They're making a bet that they can find value later, a bet that the current roster can hold up, a bet that the drop-off in talent won't be as significant as history suggests. And history, especially at the tackle position, is not particularly forgiving. The hit rate outside of the first round drops off dramatically. Elite tackles are almost always early investments, and when there's a run on the position, as many expect in this draft, waiting can mean settling. It can mean missing out on that top tier and being forced into developmental prospects who may take years to reach their potential, if they ever do. Right here is where you need to think like a front office. If you're enjoying this kind of deep breakdown, this kind of layered analysis that goes beyond headlines and actually gets into the strategic DNA of a team, make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay locked in, because this is exactly where championships are decided, not just on Sundays, but in moments like these. Now, layer on top of that the financial reality Detroit is dealing with. Holmes has been very transparent about the cap constraints. This is no longer a team operating with excess flexibility. They've paid their core. They've rewarded their homegrown talent. And while that's a sign of a healthy organization, it also comes with consequences. You can't pay everyone and still be aggressive in free agency. You can't have it both ways. The extensions for players like Alam McNeil, Derek Barnes, and Kirby Joseph reflect a commitment to continuity, but they also tighten the margin for error. Every draft pick now carries more weight. Every miss is more costly, and every position you fail to address early becomes harder to fix later. Holmes even laid out the dilemma in simple terms. If you have a limited budget, do you spend big on one elite player, or do you spread those resources across multiple positions? It's a question that doesn't have a perfect answer, but in Detroit's case, it directly ties into the offensive tackle discussion. Because drafting a tackle in the first round is, in many ways, the most cost-effective way to secure elite talent at one of the most expensive positions in football. If they don't do it now, when will they? Free agency isn't the answer, at least not in the traditional sense. The Lions have been bargain hunting this offseason, filling out the roster with value signings rather than headline moves. And while Holmes has made it clear the team isn't done adding talent, even hinting at post-draft acquisitions, those moves are typically about depth, not foundational pieces. You can look at the names potentially available after the draft, players like Joey Bosa, Haason Reddick, Von Miller, or Cameron Jordan, and understand the appeal. These are proven veterans, impact players, but they're also short-term solutions, often tied to specific roles, and rarely the kind of long-term answer you need at a position like left tackle. That's why this draft feels so pivotal. It's not just about filling a hole. It's about maintaining an identity. It's about protecting the infrastructure that has allowed this offense to thrive. And it's about recognizing that sometimes the best move isn't the most creative one. It's the most obvious one, executed at the right time. At the same time, there's a broader philosophical debate happening within the organization. Are the Lions too committed to their own players? Is there a risk in consistently extending homegrown talent rather than exploring external upgrades? It's a fair question, especially when you consider how quickly the financial landscape can shift in the NFL. The example of moving on from T.J. Hawkinson and replacing him with Sam Laporta is often cited as a success story. It shows that you can reset a position, find value, and even improve production. But that's not a blueprint you can apply universally. Tight end is not offensive tackle. The margin for error is much smaller, and the consequences of getting it wrong are far more severe. So when you bring it all together, the Lions don't technically have to draft a tackle in the first round. There are always alternative paths. But in terms of maximizing their roster, protecting their investment, and staying aligned with their stated goals, it's very hard to justify passing on the opportunity if it presents itself. This is where contenders separate themselves from pretenders, not in the obvious moves, but in the disciplined ones. In the willingness to recognize when a position demands priority, even if it challenges your usual approach. And as the draft approaches, all eyes will be on Holmes and that front office, because this decision won't just impact the 2026 season. It will shape the trajectory of the franchise for years to come. If you've made it this far, you already understand how critical this moment is for Detroit. So drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your take on what the Lions should do at pick 17, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth NFL analysis that breaks down the game beyond the surface level.